They told us the mission was a geological recon, high risk but routine. Surface level, no civilian contact, limited to Zone Red within the Centralia perimeter. But even before we left Fort Belvoir, there were signs this wasn't a standard op. The orders didn't come down through the usual chain. The packet was hand-delivered. No insignia, no signatures, just a stamped envelope marked Echo 6/Sigma Access. I'd been attached to Echo 6 once before, in Bosnia. Temporary detail. Engineering support, tunnel clearance. This time, it wasn't a combat zone. At least, that's what they told us. I remember it was cold, just above freezing. Thin fog clung to the hills like oil film on water. The air had that distinct acidic sharpness, the kind you get in areas with heavy sulfur deposits. My lungs burned a little with each breath. We staged at a fallback site outside Ashland, then moved in under blackout conditions with 2 vehicles. A modified M998 Humvee equipped with EM scanning equipment, and a decommissioned armored personnel carrier, no markings, no radio traffic. We entered at 0315Z. No one spoke for the first 20 minutes. Dawson, our team lead, was always quiet before deployment. Too focused. It never made you feel calm. The perimeter was still half-standing. Fences bent inward. Abandoned power poles leaning like dead trees. Inside the kill zone, the terrain was unstable. We could feel the ground shifting beneath the tires in places, hollow pockets of earth where the fires underneath had hollowed out the coal veins decades ago. But even that didn't feel like the biggest threat. It felt like we were being tolerated. Like the land was allowing us to be there, but not welcoming it. At 0352Z, Dawson handed me a sealed folder. No explanation. He didn't say where it came from. Inside was a printed topographical map, redacted in some sections, and a smaller slip of lined paper, handwritten in blue ink, beginning to smudge. I still remember the exact phrasing. If you find the opening, do not close it. That was all. No name. No context. No classification stamp. I showed it to Halvorsen, our USS liaison. He stared at it for a few seconds longer than I was comfortable with, then said, "This wasn't written by a scientist." He folded it back up without asking where it came from. At 0411Z, we located the first anomaly point, subsurface cavity, roughly 800 meters below grade, detected by synthetic aperture radar 2 weeks prior. The thermal output was unusual, 732 degrees Celsius and rising, but with no apparent ignition source. The heat signature didn't match known combustion profiles. No methane, no oxidation bloom. It wasn't behaving like a fire. We moved deeper into Zone Delta 3. The ground was still warm in places, enough to make your boots soft. Dawson was leading. I stayed back, handling telemetry. That's when we passed the remains of the old Centralia High School, half the gym floor still visible, melted and sagging toward the earth like plastic. And there, just beneath it, buried in scorched asphalt and rebar, was the hatch. Steel. Reinforced. 1.8 meters across. Welded shut from the outside. I'm not speculating when I say this, the welds were clean. Too clean. That steel had been sealed recently. The surface bore no oxidization, no spalling. Someone had come back to Centralia long after the town was declared uninhabitable, not to investigate, but to lock something in. Washington, the youngest in the team, was the first to speak. He was crouched by the edge of the hatch, examining the seams. These welds are less than 10 years old. Dawson didn't respond at first. He just knelt down and ran his hand across the steel. Then, softly, "This wasn't closed because someone got scared." "Then why?" I asked. He didn't answer. He stood up and called for the thermic lance. While Bennett prepped the gear, Halvorsen was staring at his handheld scanner. "I'm getting backscatter anomalies from below this point. Echoes that shouldn't be there. Something's bouncing signal from within the cavity." I asked what it could be, gas pockets, maybe mineral deposits. He just shook his head. "It's not geological." The team fell silent. At 0443Z, we breached the weld. The hatch lifted with a low hiss. No pressure release, no fumes, just heat. Dry, radiant heat that felt old. Heavy. We hadn't gone down yet. Just standing there, looking into the black, I felt something shift in my chest. Like pressure, but not physical. I remember gripping the edge of the hatch with my gloved hand, and I couldn't feel the metal anymore. Not temperature. Not texture. Nothing. Then Dawson muttered, almost to himself. We're not the first ones here. October 4th, 1996, Centralia, Pennsylvania 0450Z. The descent wasn't immediate. We spent the first 20 minutes rechecking equipment, confirming oxygen levels and logging surface temperatures, even though none of that data would make it into an official report. I knew that the moment Dawson disconnected our uplink, everything we were collecting from that point on would stay in the vehicles, isolated. No live transmission. No redundancy. That wasn't protocol. Bennett asked if we were going to keep a parallel record. Dawson didn't even look up when he answered. Not this time. At 0454Z, Halvorsen confirmed atmospheric integrity below ground, oxygen around 19%, trace methane, negligible CO, safe enough. The hatch opened fully at 0456Z. Inside, a vertical shaft. Reinforced steel, anchored in concrete, descending 12 meters straight down. Attached to one side, a spiral access ladder, fixed in 4-point intervals with industrial bolts. The structure wasn't old. We checked the corrosion index, low. High-carbon steel, modern grade. Coated. This wasn't something from the 60s. It had been built after the evacuation of Centralia. I remember pausing at the edge, flashlight in hand. The air that rose up from the opening was dense, not foul, but pressurized. Like the smell that leaks from long-sealed vacuum systems. Dry metal, electrical insulation, the faintest trace of ammonia. Washington went first. He insisted. Said he needed to get it over with. I watched his boots disappear into the dark, one rung at a time, until his voice came through on comms. Landing pad at the bottom. That's weird. Everything echoes down here. I went second. The descent was slow. The shaft was silent, insulated, and cold. The light from above died fast, and the beam from my helmet struggled against the matte coating on the interior walls. No graffiti. No markings. Just clean black metal, faintly sweating with condensation. The moment my boots touched the lower platform, I felt it, a low-frequency vibration, subtle but constant. Not seismic. Not mechanical. It was like standing beside a transformer running just below threshold. Enough to feel it in your joints, but not enough to hear it. The room we entered was rectangular, 10 meters wide, maybe 20 long. Reinforced steel floor, walls with embedded conduit lines, most inactive. There were storage lockers, empty racks, wall brackets for equipment that had clearly been removed. But someone had been here before. Recently. There was no dust. No sign of animal intrusion. Even the air felt processed. Halvorsen swept the scanner along the far wall. He stopped when he picked up residual EM flux, the kind of signal you get from degaussed electronics. That's when we saw the panel. Embedded into the floor near the eastern wall, flush with the metal plates. A secondary hatch. Smaller, rectangular. Scratched around the edges, like it had been opened many times without proper tools. No handle. No labels. Dawson knelt and ran his hand across the seam. This wasn't supposed to be here, he said, then looked at me. Did the map you received show anything below this level? I shook my head. No. Everything past surface elevation was blacked out. It didn't even list this platform. At 0508Z, Bennett found the first marking, a strip of faded text above the conduit junction, stenciled in worn gray paint. Kerntrager Sicherung, not Fallventilgeschlossen halten. German. We had no German assets on this op. Halvorsen looked at it and muttered. Reactor core protection. Emergency valve. Keep closed. Washington exhaled sharply. So this was a power facility? Halvorsen didn't answer. Dawson opened the small hatch using a collapsible torque tool. It didn't resist much. The panel gave way with a soft metallic groan, and beneath it, another ladder. This one older. Bolted into concrete instead of steel. Different construction. Different air. I felt something in my chest then. Not fear, not yet. Just a kind of hesitation that didn't have a rational cause. I found myself scanning the others to see if anyone else was feeling it. Bennett was rubbing the back of his neck. Washington had gone quiet. Dawson just stared down the hole for a long time before finally saying, "Let's go." We descended again. This second shaft dropped 20 meters. The light from above didn't reach. Our helmet lamps flickered once halfway down, then stabilized. I thought it was interference, but the lights didn't glitch again for the rest of the op. At the base, we stepped into a corridor. Concrete, no paint. The walls were damp, surface temperature around 22 degrees Celsius, warmer than expected. There was airflow. Faint, but directional. Something was drawing air further in. Who the hell builds this under a coal fire? Washington whispered. His voice cracked a little in the calm. No one responded. Then, as we rounded the first corner, Halvorsen stopped walking. He was staring straight ahead. "That shouldn't be here," he said. What he meant was the door. Steel, triple reinforced. With a working biometric scanner mounted beside it. The light on the scanner was green. Active. October 4th, 1996, Centralia substructure, level -20539Z. I don't know what I expected to be behind that biometric door. Maybe a dead terminal, a sealed room, storage. What I didn't expect was for it to unlock. Not with a key. Not with override. Just open. The scanner ran a sweep the moment Dawson stepped near it. No prompt. No beep. A soft chime, then a green light. It read him as authorized. Which wasn't possible. The door slid open on magnetic rails. No creak. No groan. The mechanisms were too smooth, too well maintained. The hallway beyond it was lit by emergency strips along the lower walls, a dull amber glow, powered, somehow, by a grid that had no visible source. The air was warmer. Slightly humid. Not foul, just old. We followed it in, single file, weapons holstered but ready. The corridor ran maybe 10 meters before opening into a larger chamber. The second I stepped in, I knew this was something else entirely. The materials changed. The layout changed. Concrete and steel gave way to smooth composite walls, seamless, curved slightly inward like we were inside the hull of a ship. The floor had vibration damping. There were no cables. No junction boxes. No panels to open. The place wasn't just sealed, it was sealed off. The room was circular. Roughly 15 meters in diameter, with a vaulted ceiling and a soft resonance that made every movement feel amplified. In the center stood a console, or what was left of one. It had no screen, no visible interface, just a column of worn control surfaces, buttons, sliders, and switches, most of them locked in place or broken off. To the right of the console, there were 7 cylindrical tubes, each 2 meters tall and reinforced with thick glass. They were mounted to the floor with steel rings and capped with pressure lock lids. All of them were open. 6 were empty. The 7th had residue. Black markings on the inside, not blood, not fluid. Something more like soot, but greasy. Like old carbon buildup in jet engines. There were indentations on the inner walls. Not uniform. Organic, maybe. Almost like something had rested against the inside and pressed outward. Washington leaned close to one of the tubes and whispered, "This isn't storage. These were containment units." No one disagreed. We began sweeping the room. Bennett took radiation readings, elevated, but not immediately dangerous. Halvorsen activated his handheld recorder and began reading off structural details, his voice getting more uncertain with each line. Composite surface, not consistent with known military construction, no serials, no stamped markers. Then he paused. "Guys, this isn't even US made. I don't think this is military at all." Dawson approached the console. There was a slot for something, a data card, perhaps, and a small light was still blinking red. He didn't touch it. He just stared. That's when we noticed the sound. It was faint, buried beneath the ambient hum of the room. The pulsing rhythm, irregular, like metal under tension. It wasn't coming from machinery. It was deeper, physical, like something resonating in the floor itself. The sound wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from below. I checked my watch. It had reset itself. Midnight blinking. Dawson turned toward the center of the room and noticed something on the ground in front of the tubes. A bundle of tape. Old magnetic reel. He picked it up carefully. It wasn't labeled. Halvorsen pulled out a compact UHR player from his kit. We used it to analyze old recordings from abandoned sites, and spooled the tape onto it manually. He pressed play. What came through was grainy, layered with static. But the voice was clear enough to make out. Experiment A7. Log number 6. Date, March 14, 1964. Containment compromised after contact event. Subject displayed adaptive behavior beyond parameters. Secondary protocol activated. All assets evacuated. Site lockdown ordered until parameters stabilize. There was a long pause, then what sounded like breathing, deep, deliberate. Then something strange, a low-frequency tone, oscillating slowly. Halvorsen paused the tape. Looked around the room. What contact event? Washington asked, half to himself. Dawson rewound the tape slightly and played the last few seconds again. This time, we noticed something we hadn't heard before, a voice in the background. Barely audible, not the same speaker. It was reciting numbers. A series. Bennett was writing them down when we heard a click. One of the lights above the tube marked 07, shut off. Then came a pop from the corner of the room, a breaker somewhere tripping. Everything went quiet. Dawson turned to me. Get ready to move. We're not staying in this level. We didn't argue. But none of us said the obvious. If this wasn't the first time this room had been entered, where were the last people who came down? October 4, 1996, Centralia substructure, level -30608Z. We didn't take the main corridor back. Dawson directed us through a side junction marked only on the analog copy of the facility layout Halvorsen had recovered. It was labeled in pencil, Maintenance Access, Alt Route B. The tape recorder was still in my hand. I'd forgotten I was holding it. It had stopped playing, but the reels were still turning on their own. Halvorsen removed the cassette and pocketed it without a word. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dry, sloped slightly downward. The further we walked, the more I noticed the heat rising again, not abrupt, but steady, as if we were approaching a buried power source. Only there were no cables, no transformers, no ventilation. Just poured concrete, seams sealed at regular intervals, with fine particulate dust gathering at the corners. We reached a T-junction around 0612Z. That's when we found the anomaly. The wall at the center of the fork was bowed outward. Not cracked. Not ruptured. Bowed, as if pressure had built up behind it, not from water or seismic stress, but from force. The concrete had visible stress lines, and flakes of paint had peeled away from the heat. Bennett placed a palm near the surface and pulled back immediately. That's over 90 degrees, he said. It's not melting, but it's right on the edge. The EM scanner was useless. It cycled endlessly, trying to recalibrate. The magnetometer went dead. Halvorsen tapped the wall lightly with the butt of his flashlight. The sound it made didn't match concrete. It echoed, metallic and hollow. This isn't structural anymore. It's a shell. Dawson gestured to the corridor to the right. We keep going. Record everything. Nobody splits up. We advanced in tight formation. The hallway was longer than expected, about 70 meters. At the end, a large circular hatch, industrial grade, coated in matte black thermal-resistant paint. Unlike anything we'd seen so far. It had no locking mechanism. No keypad. No hinges. Just a single circular indentation in the center. I don't remember who noticed it first, but there was something embedded in the concrete wall beside the hatch. A tag, half-melted, written in compressed technical font. Property of NAVSEA/A7D unit/ do not access without level 7 clearance. Bennett turned to Dawson. A7 again. This is all one site. Dawson's jaw clenched slightly. He didn't respond. We set up lights, battery-powered, and Halvorsen began photographing everything. The tag, the wall deformation, the hatch. I kept my distance. The heat was worse here, and the silence was oppressive. The kind that builds pressure in your ears and makes your pulse feel too loud. Then, without warning, the lights dimmed. All of them. Not out, just down like a power drain had kicked in. I checked my watch again. Reset. Midnight. That's when Washington said, very quietly, "There's something on the other side of that door." His voice didn't sound like fear. It sounded like certainty. Like a conclusion he'd reached well before any of us had the courage to admit it. Dawson stepped closer to the hatch, looked at the indentation, and reached into his vest. He pulled out the same card we'd used earlier, Sigma 3. Without a word, he placed it in the groove. There was no click. No confirmation tone. But the hatch began to slide open. In total silence. Inside was a chamber, maybe 20 meters across, circular like the level above, but lower, almost compressed. The walls were constructed from a different material altogether. Metallic but not reflective. Matte, slightly ridged, with texture patterns we didn't recognize. The temperature dropped instantly. From sweltering to cold, not freezing but sharp, dry, empty cold. Our breath became visible. In the center of the room, a pedestal, concrete again, standard military pour, set directly into the floor. No ornamentation. On top of it, a control interface of some kind, with no labels. Just 3 buttons, red, green, and black, and a blank display. Halvorsen didn't approach. He looked shaken. This wasn't built for humans. There was movement on the wall behind the pedestal, not physical, but visual. A pattern emerged from the matte material, rising as if responding to light or motion. 3 curved lines. Downward arcs. Identical to the symbol we'd seen near the second shaft. Then something else. On the floor, burned into the surface just beside the pedestal, we saw a unit insignia. Echo 6. But the date stenciled beneath it wasn't 1996. It was 2025. Washington took a step back. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not. He backed into me. I grabbed his arm and kept him from bolting. He was shaking. The walls began to hum. Low, steady frequency, somewhere below 30 hertz. It rattled the lights, buzzed in our teeth. Then Bennett's voice, flat. My compass just reversed polarity. We didn't need orders. Dawson simply said, "We're pulling out." But as we turned to leave, the hatch we'd entered through was already closed. And there was no visible way to open it again. October 4th, 1996, Centralia substructure, level -30631Z. We didn't panic. Not at first. The hatch was sealed, flush with the wall. No latch. No panel. Just a seamless black surface that had once been open and now, without sound or command, wasn't. Dawson ran his hand along the frame twice before saying anything. He looked over at me, then at Halvorsen, and finally said quietly, "We're finding another way out." The words were calm. But I noticed the change in his tone, the clipped syllables, the drop in volume. Dawson wasn't unsure. He was adjusting. Bennett kept his eyes on the panel. That thing didn't close because we triggered it. It closed because it was on a cycle. Pre-programmed. No one contradicted him. Washington was pacing, not far, 5 steps forward, 5 back. Every few seconds he'd glance at the floor like it might shift. I don't think he even realized he was doing it. We re-entered the pedestal room and began scanning the perimeter for any other egress. No hatch, no tunnel, no ventilation shafts. Just the sealed door and the walls, now completely silent. The arcs that had emerged from the matte material had faded. Whatever had responded to us was either finished or waiting. Halvorsen approached the pedestal again, slower this time. He pulled out a small data probe from his bag, civilian tech, not ideal for unknown interfaces, but all we had. He ran it along the surface near the blank display. Nothing. He tried pressing the green button. No reaction. Then red. He paused over the black one and looked at Dawson. I don't think this activates anything. I think it's a signal acknowledgement. That's why there's no feedback. Dawson gave a slight nod. Leave it. We moved back into the corridor, retracing our steps to the original fork at the bowed wall. The concrete still radiated heat, now higher. I couldn't measure it directly, but the proximity burned the air in my throat. I kept swallowing, trying to coat my mouth with spit, but it wasn't working. It felt like breathing near a kiln. At 0638Z, Halvorson's scanner picked up displacement ahead, air movement, subtle, rhythmic. Pulses, maybe. I remember the look he gave me. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. I didn't ask what he was thinking. I already knew. We moved forward. 10 meters down the hallway, the walls started sweating. Condensation forming rapidly, trickling down in lines that steamed off the floor. That's when it started, the distortion. It was like the light was off by a fraction of a second. Our headlamps flickered independently, not in sync. And the space between us started to stretch. Not visibly, but perceptibly. Every step felt slightly longer than the last, and our comms began to lag. Just milliseconds. Enough to notice. At 0643Z, Halvorson collapsed. He didn't fall. He just stopped walking and lowered himself to the ground like his body had run out of current. Dawson and I rushed to him. His pupils were dilated, fixed. His vitals were erratic, pulse racing, shallow breathing, skin cold. But his lips were moving. No sound. I leaned in, listened carefully. He was repeating something over and over. At first I couldn't parse it. Then I realized it was Latin. Ad tenebras, descendus. I asked Bennett. He had some university Latin. He translated without looking up. We descend into darkness. We stabilized Halvorson as best we could. He wasn't unconscious, but he wasn't tracking. Whatever had hit him, it wasn't environmental. His vitals didn't suggest poisoning or exposure. It looked more like dissociation. Detachment. At 0649Z, we heard the first external sound. Metal, striking concrete. Chirp. Rhythmic. We froze. It echoed faintly, then stopped. Silence returned. And then a new sound, different. Breathing. But not ours. I know how that sounds. But this wasn't mechanical. It wasn't airflow. It was breath, measured, low, exhaled slow through something not built like lungs. We backed out of the corridor. Fast but controlled. I helped carry Halvorson. Washington was behind me, weapon raised. The breathing stopped the moment we exited. Back in the corridor near the pedestal room, the lights dimmed again. Then something passed by the far end of the hall. No shape. Just a brief occlusion of light, like someone had walked in front of a distant lamp. No thermal signature. No footsteps. Nothing on audio. Bennett's voice came through the comm. Something's looping our sensors. Then his hand went to his ear. Guys, did anyone just say my name? Dawson shook his head. Negative. Someone just said my full name. In my headset. Not a call sign. That's when I felt it too. Not sound. Not vibration. Just presence. Like a pressure shift in a sealed room, or the feeling when an elevator stops too fast. We were being watched. Not hunted. Not stalked. Observed. That was the moment I knew. We weren't lost. We were being kept. October 4th, 1996, Centralia substructure, level -30704Z. We made it back to the original fork and took shelter in a secondary chamber just off the junction. A storage bay, maybe, or part of the old access control system. It had collapsed partially on one side, but the remaining structure was intact. It gave us 30 seconds to breathe, regroup, recalibrate. We laid Halvorson out on a steel slab that might once have held equipment. His pulse had steadied, but he still wasn't speaking. His eyes tracked us barely, like he was stuck between frames. Dawson was the first to break the silence. What did we trigger? Nobody had an answer. Washington crouched against the wall, weapon laid across his knees, fingers twitching. Bennett kept scanning the local EM field. It was fluctuating again, in wide, unnatural swings. No static, just wave compression. Something was wrong with the way space itself responded to our presence down here. Then we found the file cabinet. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't even locked. Tucked in the far corner of the chamber under a tarp marked Navsia Opis, it was just sitting there, rusted, intact. 4 drawers. Dawson opened the top one and pulled out a stack of laminated reports, most printed in 1964. Most were stamped A7D, with additional seals from Department of Naval Research and something blacked out entirely. No military branch. No command signature. Just a black bar. The report titles varied. One caught my attention immediately. Dimensional encoding parameters, revised containment protocols. I read that one 3 times. Dimensional wasn't a word we used lightly in ops. Halvorsen stirred when Dawson read the title aloud. Not spoke, stirred. Like the word meant something to whatever part of him was still awake. Bennett opened the second drawer and pulled out something heavier, a magnetic reel container. Inside was a single reel labeled Log 8/audio-only/post-incident debrief. He handed it to me, and I fed it into the UHER player again. I hit play. The voice that came through was shaky. Older. American accent, Mid-Atlantic. This is Dr. Edward Rothman, Clearance 7FB. This recording is made under Directive Clause 55 Echo, with immediate seal to follow. As of March 16, containment of subject A7 has failed. Repetitive contact has led to adaptive behavior not anticipated by Phase 2 conditioning. Subject no longer responds to environmental restraints. There was a pause, then. Motion within the secondary layer continues even after thermal isolation. Visual anomalies persist. Site personnel reporting inconsistent temporal perception. Exposure time now limited to 6 minutes without induced collapse. Recommendation: full site neutralization or relocation. The tape kept running, but the next voice wasn't the same. It was female. Fainter. Almost mechanical. We are not in the same layer. Then static. Washington exhaled sharply. That wasn't part of the original recording. Halvorsen sat up. He didn't speak, but his mouth moved, the same phrase again. Latin. But this time, he added something else. A new phrase. Ad tenebras descend imis, portam clausi. I looked at Bennett. We descend into darkness, we close the gate. He sat there, fully conscious now. Looked at Dawson. His voice was hoarse, raw. You have to listen to me. We were never supposed to open it again. Dawson stepped closer. What is it? What's the gate? Halvorsen shook his head. It's not a gate. It's a protocol. A command embedded in the structure. We don't close it from here. We trigger it. That's what the black button is for. That word, trigger, landed heavier than it should have. The pedestal. The sealed chamber. The lack of access panels. It wasn't designed to operate. It was designed to be activated. Washington stood up. This is starting to feel like a trap. Bennett responded flatly. It's not a trap. It's a test site. Always was. There was silence after that. Just the low hum returning from the corridor, the same frequency we'd felt earlier, 27, maybe 28 hertz. Something just on the edge of perception. Then, without warning, the UHR player turned back on. We hadn't touched it. The reel wasn't moving. But a voice came through anyway. It was our frequency. Echo 6. And the voice was Dawson's. Not present-day Dawson, younger. Recorded. Clipped and professional. Echo 6, calling Zulu base. Negative on surface contact. Negative on evac. Repeat. Containment breach verified. Perimeter unstable. Requesting immediate fire seal authorization. We all turned to Dawson. He hadn't moved. His voice was low. That's not possible. I've never recorded that transmission. I checked the UHR. The tape reel was empty. There was no tape inside. October 4, 1996, Centralia substructure, unknown depth 0719Z. The moment that voice came through the tape deck, my own voice, recorded, transmitted, verified, something shifted in the room. Not in a dramatic way. There was no crash of metal, no burst of light. But it was like the air itself settled. Like whatever was listening had acknowledged us. None of us spoke for a while. The machine was silent again. The reel had never turned. It was just sitting there. Dawson checked his own recorder. Manual backup, analog. Still blank. Washington stood by the corridor entrance, hand on his rifle grip, jaw clenched so tight I could see the tendons in his neck twitching. We need to leave this level now. even if we have to breach the walls. Dawson didn't respond to that. Instead, he turned to Halvorsen. You said the black button triggers something. Show me. Halvorsen nodded reluctantly, rising slow like the weight of his own limbs was a calculation. We followed him back down the corridor, back toward the pedestal room. As we approached, the temperature dropped again. Not like before. This was different. Not gradual. Not natural. It was like stepping into a vacuum. Static. So, the hatch had opened. We hadn't heard it move. But it was open, fully recessed into the wall, exposing a second chamber beyond. Dawson stopped walking. Could see why. The room wasn't a room. Not exactly. It was circular, but the walls curved inward toward the ceiling, forming an almost dome-like shape, with no light source visible. Yet we could see everything. It wasn't lit. It was just visible. The walls were lined with concentric rings, etched in faint grooves, like a giant fingerprint pressed into metal. At the center of the room, mounted to the floor, was another pedestal. Identical to the first, except for one difference. This one had something resting on it. A small cube. Matte black. About the size of a field radio battery. No ports. No markings. Just sitting there. None of us moved. Halvorsen whispered, barely audible. This isn't from the 60s. This isn't from any time we can account for. Washington stepped back. We shouldn't be in here. Bennett raised his scanner again. Magnetics are stable. But EM field is off. It's not decaying. It's holding. That didn't make sense. Fields decay over time, even residual ones. Unless something was actively generating it. Halvorsen walked forward and pointed to the panel just beneath the cube, 3 buttons again. Red, green, and black. Dawson looked over at me. I shook my head. You said we were here to observe. Not to engage. We're past observation. He stepped forward. We need to know if this is still active. Halvorsen didn't argue. He just pressed the black button. Nothing happened. Then the sound. Distant. Like air moving through a colossal structure. The floor vibrated faintly under our boots. The rings on the walls began to glow, dull orange to deep red, one by one, like an enormous eye slowly opening. We backed off, weapons up, not knowing what to expect. But the cube didn't move. The room didn't change. No doors closed. No lights flared. What did change was the hallway behind us. When we turned, the corridor we'd entered from was no longer there. It had been replaced by a different passage. Same dimensions, same materials, but it ran in a different direction. The walls were drier. The ambient sound had changed. The frequency hum was gone. Washington swore under his breath. We've been repositioned. No, Bennett said. We've been transferred. I felt it too. The sense of spatial displacement. Like we'd stepped sideways without moving. The mind tries to catch up, but something doesn't align. We followed the corridor anyway, not because we knew where it went, but because standing still had become more dangerous than walking into the unknown. The new hallway was colder. Shorter. At the end was a single door, open. No markings. We moved through it and found a chamber similar in size to the pedestal room but different in one way. There was evidence of habitation. A field cot in the corner. Rations. An old duffel bag. One folding chair. A stack of printed photos spread across the floor, aerial surveillance images, mostly. But not of Centralia. One was marked Yamal Peninsula, 1982. Another, Dyatlov Ridge, 1959. The last one stopped me cold. Echo 6, Pre-Mission Brief, Fort Belvoir, 1996. It was a photo of us. Taken from above. We hadn't seen a camera. We hadn't posed. We hadn't even been together in one place until that staging point. And yet, here it was, printed, marked, and yellowing at the edges as if it had sat in this room for years. Dawson picked it up and turned it over. On the back, written in block letters. You came back. October 4th, 1996, Centralia substructure, undisclosed sector 0746Z. None of us said anything for a full minute. We just stared at the photo in Dawson's hand, the 4 of us, standing in front of the transport at Fort Belvoir, fully kitted up. We hadn't posed. We hadn't been briefed. That photo shouldn't exist. Halvorsen reached out, flipped through the others. All were aerial or satellite shots. Some military, some civilian. Global locations. But the pattern wasn't geography. It was containment. Every site, Dyatlov, Yamal, Vorkuta, a remote glacier labeled simply G Camp 1, had documented black site history or classified losses tied to early Cold War-era operations. All had at least one shared designation across the margins. A 7. Washington stood in the corner, eyes darting, breathing shallow. So this place is connected to all of them. Dawson didn't answer. He folded the photo, stuck it in his chest rig, and said one word. Move. We exited the chamber back into the corridor that hadn't existed 30 minutes ago. It was different now. Drier. Ambient noise was gone, no more hum. The silence felt wrong. Not empty, but suppressed. As we walked, I noticed the hallway lights, dim LED runners near the floor, flicker in a pattern. 3 short blinks, pause, then again. Morse. I couldn't remember the exact code, but it repeated consistently. I tapped Bennett. That's a signal, right? He nodded. I think it's saying stop. Dawson ignored it. At 0752Z, the hallway opened into a larger space. It had the appearance of an old sub-level operations center, bare walls, equipment stripped out, but the architecture matched 1970s NATO-style bunkers. On one wall, stenciled in fading black paint, the 7 local/in/ingress only. There was only one exit, a rusted steel stairwell leading up. We climbed. Each step creaked, metal flaking underfoot. I counted 42 steps before the air changed, went colder, but also heavier. Like the stairwell was pushing back. At the top, another sealed hatch. We didn't open it. Because we didn't have to. It opened on its own. The mechanism groaned, slow and deliberate. Beyond it we saw only darkness. No visible floor. No lights. Just empty space where there should have been a room or exit tunnel. Then, something moved. Not stepped. Not approached. Just shifted. A displacement in the dark, too far to define. No shape, but the absence of shape, like something cutting light without taking form. Bennett raised his weapon instinctively. I've got motion. Right to left, 40 meters. Washington whispered, I don't see anything. I did. Not with my eyes, exactly. It was more like a pressure against my chest in waves. Like being watched through a lens the size of a building. It wasn't hostility. Not yet. But it wasn't passive either. Dawson dropped his rifle. Not deliberately, it just slipped from his grip, clattering to the metal floor. He didn't bend to retrieve it. We're not here to fight, he said aloud, voice even. We're not here to repeat it. The lights flickered again. 3 short pulses. Then the stairwell lights shut off completely. Emergency LEDs kicked in on our helmets. That's when the hallway behind us closed. Not with a door, just gone. Erased. As if the space behind had never existed. We were surrounded by darkness now. One direction, the void. No backtrack. No fallback. Halvorsen, surprisingly clear-headed, said, This is the test. It always was. I looked at him. What are you talking about? Containment protocols. They're not about locking something in. They're about keeping the threshold closed. You think this is a threshold? No, he said. I think this is containment. Then came the signal. Not from a device. From inside the comms. The earpieces buzzed to life. Text displayed on Bennett's HUD, raw hexadecimal strings, quickly translating. 5A45-52-4F, 5F43-4F4E54-41-43-54. The comms system tried to reboot. Our helmet lights blinked out. Audio cut, reset, then came back, but we weren't alone on the channel. There was a voice. Fragmented. Broken up like degraded tape. Echo 6, returned. Multiple failures. Proceed, gate confirmed open. That was followed by breathing. Human cadence, but shallow, ragged. Then a second voice layered beneath it, identical in tone, same pattern, but reversed, like the audio had been flipped backward. Bennett shouted, "We're getting overlapping signals. They're time offset. That's us. One's a past version of this transmission. One's from now." Then, a noise. Grinding. Bone dip. Something ancient moving beneath metal. Washington raised his rifle again, but Dawson didn't move. He stood still, looking forward. We leave now or we never leave. We had to make a decision. But that was the problem. There was no path left to take that didn't lead forward. October 4, 1996, Centralia substructure, threshold zone 0813Z. We moved forward. Not because we agreed, and not because we had a plan. Because doing nothing felt worse. The corridor ahead, if it was even a corridor, didn't exist on any schematic. The walls weren't walls anymore. They looked like concrete, but felt soft under touch, like cold graphite. The hallway shifted subtly with every dozen meters, dimensions adjusting, lighting pulsing in a way that had no visible source. It wasn't architecture. It was a boundary. Washington's breathing had gone shallow, and he'd stopped checking his corners. His rifle was down, safety still off, finger on trigger, a mistake, but no one corrected him. Bennett was mumbling under his breath, short calculations, numbers without operators. Halvorsen hadn't spoken since the lights changed. His pupils were dilated, heartbeat steady but elevated. Dawson led the column. He wasn't rushing, but his movements had become mechanical. Like he was remembering a procedure rather than discovering one. At 0818Z, the corridor ended. Not in a wall, in a mirror. A perfect reflection. Seamless, from floor to ceiling, edge to edge. The five of us stood there, staring at ourselves, all headlamps bouncing the same fractured light. I raised my hand. My reflection followed. But Bennett's didn't. We noticed it at the same time. He had turned slightly to adjust his scanner, but his reflection stayed centered, eyes locked forward. Bennett stepped back. "That's not us." Washington raised his rifle, but Dawson didn't flinch. He looked straight ahead and said, "This is what they meant by visual inconsistency in log 8. This is the containment test." Halvorsen stepped forward, slowly, raising a small field marker, a square of mylar foil designed to reflect light uniquely at different frequencies. He placed it on the floor. It disappeared. Not into shadow. Just gone. The floor hadn't swallowed it. It had erased it. Bennett stared at his own reflection. "It's not doing what I'm doing." Then softly, "I think it's watching me." He started shaking. I stepped in between him and the mirror. My reflection returned to normal. The effect stopped. Bennett's breathing slowed. But behind me, something had changed. The mirror wasn't reflecting the room anymore. It was showing something else. A hallway, identical in construction, but older. Exposed wiring. Rusted supports. Wet floor. Fluorescent lights flickering in slow, uneven pulses. And at the far end, maybe 40 meters, a door. Painted yellow. Wide open. Washington took a step closer. "I've seen this before." He didn't mean in a dream. He meant in training. The file. A debrief. Something old, buried. It's the Vorkuta tunnel. The missing section. The one that was sealed in 81 after the event. Bennett turned to Dawson. "How is it showing that?" "That's the USSR side." No answer. Then the mirror changed again. Now it showed a vast, barren corridor. No doors, no walls. Just space stretching indefinitely. On the floor, in the center, was a single object, a helmet. Our standard issue helmet. It had a name stenciled on the side, Dawson. And next to it, the unmistakable scar of blast damage. Close range. Directed. Dawson turned away, calm. "That's not a vision. That's a record." We backed off, slowly. The mirror did not follow. It just remained, a silent aperture into multiple possibilities, none of which gave us a way out. At 0824Z, the temperature dropped again. No visible fog. Just a sharp drop, enough that our gear auto-adjusted to heat mode. The lights dimmed to near black, then stabilized. Then came the voice. "Neutral." Familiar. Dawson, confirm intent. Protocol Delta 7. He froze. Say again. Confirm intent. This is your last viable exit vector. Protocol Delta 7. Execute or rescind. Who is this? Echo 6 final branch reached. Failure index, 92.6%. Execute or rescind. We had no uplink. No external comms. This was local. Embedded. Dawson looked back at us. Then at the mirror. If I hit that button back at the pedestal, do we go back? Halvorsen answered first. You don't go back. You stop the loop. For everyone. Washington didn't move. We don't even know what we're stopping. I watched Dawson carefully. His shoulders dropped slightly. He looked older than he had hours ago. We're stopping the next US from making the same mistake. Then the lights shut off again, this time for good. We activated chem lights. Dim, green glow. Emergency only. In that faint light, the corridor behind us was gone. And then we heard it, not footsteps, not breathing. A slow scraping, like something heavy being dragged across steel. Measured. Consistent. Coming from somewhere past the mirror. But we weren't watching the reflection anymore. It was watching us. October 4th, 1996, Centralia surface perimeter, time unknown. I don't remember how we got back. There was no transition. No ascent. No signal. One moment we were inside, buried in geometry that didn't map to any floor plan, hearing something move toward us through a mirror that wasn't reflecting, and the next moment, we were above ground. Or what passed for above. We were just collapsed on the old slag piles that marked the northern perimeter of the Centralia site. Our gear was scorched. Comms fried. Wristwatches all reset again. Blank screens, no power. But the fire was still burning beneath us. The ground still pulsed with that low, volcanic ache. Bennett was bleeding from the nose. Washington had burns on his left shoulder. Dawson was silent. Halvorsen hadn't come through. I don't know if he stayed behind or never existed beyond that place in the first place. But only 4 of us made it back. That much we were sure of, at least for a while. We attempted contact. First via our field beacon, nothing. Then we activated the old Cold War-era comms relay near the truck staging zone. It pinged, received a response, then dumped a partial header with a date stamp. March 19, 1981. Bennett and I checked it 3 times. We hadn't gone back in time. At least not physically. But the signal we were using, and the system it was connecting to, those were responding from the past. The rest of the city was dead quiet. No birds. No trucks. No trace of the engineers who'd originally cleared the entrance hours before. No sign that the entrance had ever been cleared at all. We circled back to the site perimeter. Where the elevator platform had been lowered for insertion, there was now just solid ground. Blacked up. Correct. No sign of the opening. No steel supports. No lift. No access point. Washington tried to triangulate our location using sun position and magnetic declination. His compass spun in place. The sun hadn't moved in what felt like an hour. Bennett threw up behind the truck. Motion sickness. Or maybe something else. He said he kept hearing something in his comms. A soft voice repeating a date. October 4th, 1996. That's the only thing that matched. The date of the operation. It was like the place was trying to remind us. Or reset us. Or loop us back. Dawson hadn't spoken since we surfaced. He sat on the bed of the truck, holding something tightly in his right hand. I didn't notice until we were halfway back to the secondary relay tower that he had the cube. The one from the pedestal. It was intact. Untouched. As if it had never been removed. When I asked him how he had it, he said nothing. Just looked at me, then at the treeline. The fire underground hadn't stopped. The heat shimmer rose steadily from the soil, but there were no tremors. No subsidence. Just smoke. Like the town itself was waiting. We walked to the edge of Route 61. The detour path that circles the collapsed sections of highway. There were no signs of activity. No vehicles. Not even civilian trash or debris. The landscape looked scrubbed. It was 0903Z by my best guess when we saw the man. standing at the far end of the road near the split tree line. Wearing fatigues. Non-US cut was older, closer to Eastern Bloc surplus. He didn't move. Didn't signal. Just stood there as if confirming something. I raised my rifle. He mirrored it. Not defensively. Just in parallel. Then he turned and walked into the woods. Dawson finally spoke. "We've reached the other side." I didn't understand what he meant. Still don't. We left the site an hour later. The GPS had returned, sort of, not accurate, but alive. The signal kept recalibrating, jumping between coordinates with margins of error over a kilometer. We drove in silence. At the edge of the state line, we stopped at a closed gas station to refuel. Bennett checked the shortwave radio. A weather broadcast came through, NOAA stream. Timestamp was current, but it referred to Centralia as an active community. Population, 812. No mention of the mine fire. No mention of the evacuation order from 1984. No federal shutdown. No contaminated ground. Just weather patterns. Traffic flow. Expected rain. We turned it off. I never filed a report. None of us did. The cube disappeared a week later. Dawson claimed he left it in his locker, Bayside. But the cameras never caught him removing it. The footage just skipped. We stopped talking about it. But sometimes, when I walk past high-voltage substations or listen to old radios scanning dead air, I hear it again. Not words. Just the sound of breathing. Always calm. Always close.